Greetings. Thank you very much for joining me here in my living room. My name is Derrick Michaels. I'm joining you from Baltimore, Maryland, and this is Thursday Thoughts, episode number 6. For the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, I've been totally obsessed with the idea of a Venn diagram as a creative launching pad or an understanding for the possibility of creativity by combining things that seem to not belong together based on our prescriptive notions of genre or stylistic separations or demographics that we haven't necessarily considered putting in the same room. It's bottomless, it's infinite, the number of combinations and possibilities we can have. So I specifically want to touch base with you guys on the illusion of duality that is essentially being confronted by the existence of the Venn diagram and the beautiful human and spiritual implications of the overlap in the center, the almond-shaped overlap in the center. This overlap between two circles in a Venn diagram is called a Mandorla, and it's an ancient spiritual concept that I will loosely phrase for you for now as when we talk about the union between the physical realm and the spiritual realm, the earth realm of being, your feet planted on the ground or your head sort of in the clouds. And I've always imagined the folks that to me struck me as the greatest artists in any medium always had this way of communicating something otherworldly in a language that those of us who are mere mortals here on the ground can relate to in some way. And so that's always been maybe my deepest aspiration, has been to figure out how can I, in a material body on this physical plane, not only just access this higher realm, which I think all people can do. I think that is the nature of humanity, is to be an animal here on the physical plane of existence, dealing with our earthly stuff, while also being connected with what's beyond, even if we don't have a way of understanding it. We're obsessed with understanding it. We're obsessed with categorizing things and understanding what's different between this, and what is different between the way this acts and the way this acts. And while I think that's intellectually very interesting to perceive differences, and has in some ways really helped, extend the life expectancy of humans, it has also, to be grave about it, maybe had dramatic implications for the next generation or two in potentially threatening the extent to which humans will continue to exist on a planet here if we continue to live in a way where we are separating ourselves from the planet that we live on. So that's as heavy as I want to get. But I do want to talk about, as creative people, a musician myself, improviser, what this concept of the overlap between these seemingly different things where they overlap here in this almond-shaped Mandorla, that is where all of our creative ideas kind of come to life. So my usual process when I get to be out in the world and making music for people is all about kind of reconciling perceived differences. And, behind closed doors, as a practicing artist, I'm kind of tackling my instrument on a physical level, trying to just understand how to relate to the saxophone in such a way where we're working together rather than um, at being at odds with one another. So already, just on the physical level of technique, I've got me, my human body and ideas. I've got this tool, the saxophone, that seems to be over here. And in a very literal physical way, my mouth brings a piece of that instrument into it and sends energy from within it, within my body, through the instrument to vibrate. And there is this feedback loop, this biofeedback loop, this connection, this symbiotic relationship between my body and the body of my instrument. That union is essentially, we're taking body, saxophone, and we're very physically, in a very, very physically understandable way. It's like the Mandorla there is basically where the mouthpiece and reed are vibrating in my oral cavity as a result of what I'm sending. But in a more ephemeral understanding, or a little bit more of a lofty way of putting it, it's like where the two become one. So the instrument has its own physical properties in its construction, but without me sending my information of what I heard in my head and creating a certain shape in my oral cavity and sending a particular PSI of air through this little opening, the saxophone is basically just a thing that sits there. It's potential energy. It can't create a sound on its own. And I can't create the sounds that it can create on my own. I can create all these other sounds with my mouth or by smacking my hands together or whatever. But if I want to create music with this instrument, I need to meet it halfway. So then, zooming out a little bit away from that, we have the ways that we conceptually separate technique from real music making, right? So here's technical exercise, and here is where we get to the meat of being creative. We separate these ideas. We say that, all right, run your scales and your arpeggios, and you're just doing that so that your fingers are feeling good and you've got the reeds warm and the tube, it's December here in Baltimore, and it's starting to get pretty cold, and that affects what the horn feels like. So you're warming up in a very literal sense, getting the horn in tune and all of this. And once you've run, for a lot of people, once you've run through your usual warm-up material in almost a subconscious way, engaging with it physically and not really thinking about much, then we let go of all that physical stuff and we get to the real stuff. You can imagine from the way that I'm stating that the interesting aspect for me in personal practice is to take those two things and overlap as much as possible. So how creative can we be in our warm-up process? Can we conceive before we even pick the instrument up of what it's going to feel like in our hand, what it's going to feel like resting on our shoulders, what it's going to feel like the teeth resting on the mouthpiece and the tip of the tongue resting on the reed before we take a breath and blow a note? Can we hear the note before we play? Can we hear the note not only in terms of the pitch, but in terms of the tone color and the dynamic potential, right? Are we going to play with vibrato or without? If we're engaging with vibrato, what approach are we going to take to that? How are we going to attack the beginning of the note? How are we going to taper it off at the end? So for me, that process of engaging with the instrument physically, of creating that union between me and the instrument, is a creative process. And the warming up and the being creative and thinking about music conceptually, exactly the same thing. That's the overlap, the mandorla in the middle. So this physical plane of just engaging with the instrument is the same thing as this conceptual, creative, and even cerebral sense of like, all right, what kind of stuff do I want to work on today? It isn't physical and then the interesting stuff. If they're not all one and the same, you're creating a duality where there isn't really a duality. You are separating elements that belong together and treating them as if they don't. So like conceiving of a human being without the earth is an interesting idea, but it also has really terrible implications if we start deciding that, yeah, we don't really need this stuff here, right? So these things that live in harmony together, these things that operate in harmony together, you can't really have one without the other. To zoom out a little bit more, maybe all that sum total of your creative process as an artist in your own space, where you are creating a union between yourself and your instrument and your ideas, and that's all overlapping here very regularly. You're getting a pretty clear sense of yourself in the idea of yourself as an artist, and then you collaborate with one other person, or you put together an ensemble. And now it's all of your conceptions of self and the music all overlapping at these different points. And where that thing in the middle is, that is really where the magic happens, is the overlap of all of this. Then put an audience in the mix, or a venue in the mix, or all three. Now you've got your individual identity and your sound and your concept with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many other musicians on stage with their, complete picture of who they think they are as artists, and all of those things are overlapping while the music is happening in a beautiful sounding space for a room full of people who are bringing their concept of what they think this performance is going to give them, right? And that's overlapping with our idea of what this performance is going to give them. And all of those circles are overlapping together in this one area of right now. As cliche and kind of maybe a little too lofty as that sounds, it's like the moment that we're in right now is the overlapping of every conceivable thing all happening at once. Every thought, every sound, every sensation, every moment that's ever existed is all intersecting here. So it's very difficult to conceive of the infinite circles that are all intersecting it right now. So it's also very natural to conceptually start removing overlaps in order to try to boil it down to this and this, 0 and 1, some kind of a binary. Please, it's like we're begging, please give me something I can understand. Bright versus dark sound, right? Loud versus soft. Mechanical versus lyrical. You know what I mean? Straight tone versus vibrato. Jazz versus classical. Pop music versus creative music. It's very natural in trying to sort out and find order to what's going on in life. This is part of the tool of the mind that we have, that is what makes it so amazing to be a human, is that we have the ability to conceptualize these things. But as a creative person, especially in any kind of a performing art, we're bringing people together. In 2020 right now, for the safety of the public, we can't be bringing people together. Hopefully in 2021, we'll be at a point to be able to do that again. And as somebody who creates concert experiences, believe me, I can't wait for the moment to bring people together around this idea again with a heightened sensitivity to the beauty of what it is that we're talking about here. So in looking forward to that opportunity to do this, I think for me, it's like the zooming in and zooming out to understand both what seem to be two, whatever. Again, I just named a whole list of things that seem like a 0 and a 1 that don't go together. Any two things that you can imagine that seem to have nothing to do with one another. Apples and oranges. People say you're comparing apples with oranges. They're two kinds of fruit that when you bite into them are kind of juicy and give you some nourishment. There is overlap there. You can compare apples and oranges. You can eat slices of apple and slices of orange at the same breakfast meal. That's what makes it amazing to be a human. So the intellectual processes of separating apples from oranges is very helpful to us as a tool. But if we over-identify with the process of separating, we see the dramatic implications that has at putting ourselves at odds with the planet, at putting groups of people at odds with one another by separating left and right, black and white, etc., etc. I said I wasn't going to get any heavier, so I'll stop there. I want you to just consider how amazing it is to be able, as a person, to both conceptualize what is completely different between any two things and what is exactly the same. And the creative process, in my opinion, is to understand and integrate both. To not see everything as the same without understanding what's unique about one thing and another thing, but to understand that the paradox is beautiful, that things are equally completely different and exactly the same. And that's what makes this whole thing so much damn fun, right? So everybody have a great week. Thanks for checking this out. I hope it was useful to you in some way. Shoot me a message if it was something that you were into, if you have questions, if you have insights about this thought process from your own experience. I love talking to you guys. So thank you. Have a great week. I'll see you next Thursday.